If one were to ask me 5 years ago if Manhunt could be any type of realistic regarding its content, I would disagree. However, given the nature of some recent files being released along with everyone and their mothers seemingly talking about them, a massive snuff ring run by an older and somehow creepier Dan Schneider isn't entirely off the table. I miss those times when it was pure fantasy. I also feel compelled, regardless of your age, to mention a content advisory warning for lots and lots of admittedly PS2 quality gore, as well as very adult themes. Manhunt is one of those games that I personally find myself thinking about quite often, and not because I'm insane. At least not insane in the dangerous way, but like, look at this frickin' idiot trying to put a square peg in the star hole and somehow it working kind of way. It's more because I find the story of the first Manhunt in particular to be incredibly interesting and fun to think about in both a thematic sense and in a logical sense. Thematically, having a death row inmate freed to roam a city that is basically a prison city, as in the city is a prison, kind of like Arkham City, for the purpose of a deranged director to supply his snuff film ring is really fun. I mean, it's not really a prison city, but the infrastructure is so corrupt that it might as well be. Logically, it's fun to think about the ways that this concept could never realistically work, at least in the manner that it's presented, but then again, those files kind of show, at least in my mind, that when one has enough money and is a complete degenerate, nothing is off the table entirely, which is really an unsettling thought. Now, to those who are uninitiated and wondering exactly what the fuck it is that I'm talking about, let me break it down for you. And now let me explain. Throughout the events of Manhunt, we play as James Earl Cash, who was a death row inmate of Darkwoods Penitentiary. To the public, he was executed. Privately, Cash was transported to somewhere in Carcer City, unwillingly to participate in Lionel Starkweather's snuff film, presumably titled Manhunt. Seeing that we don't see a script, or at the very least an outline, it's safe to say that the film itself is nothing but CCTV camera shots of Cash killing people who are trying to kill him. One man versus the world type shit. Each of the missions are composed of Cash starting out in one location with Starkweather giving him some instructions, and frankly disgusting comments, via an earpiece on where to go and what to do. More often than not, it's just to kill basically everybody Cash comes into contact with. Now, these aren't just your average, everyday, normal people. Most of the people whom Cash kills are part of a gang instructed to find and kill Cash. Each gang is fairly unique, ranging from normal violent thugs to mentally and criminally insane psychopaths. There are a total of 7 gangs, 2 of which I will talk about later when they become more relevant, but the ones that we need to focus on now are the Hoods, the Skins, the War Dogs, the Innocents, and the Smileys. The Hoods are probably the most normal of these gangs, consisting entirely of street thugs, and there's really not much to say about them beyond their looks. The Skins are a bunch of white supremacist neo-Nazis. If there's only one interesting thing that could be said about the Skins, it would come from their interaction with the leader of the War Dogs. Ramirez is said leader of the War Dogs, and he is a black man giving orders and commands to the white supremacist Skins. I feel like this speaks not only to how intimidating Ramirez is, but also how cruel and violent he must be for the Skins to even deign to listen to somebody who is not white. It also speaks to how truly fragile these racists are to the moment that they are challenged by somebody who can back up their juice. They cave. The War Dogs themselves are a bunch of wannabe soldier types who wanted to join the military with the sole purpose to kill people, but got rejected because the military tends to not take people for that reason, at least not these days, so they instead formed their own murder soldier club. The Innocents are actually composed of 2 gangs, the Scullys and the Babyfaces. The Scullys are primarily composed of Mexican occultists, while the babyfaces are a mixture of mentally deficient pedophilic serial killers. I don't know why those gangs are shacking up together. I don't really want to know, to be fully honest, but they will be getting the red executions. The last of the gangs are the Smileys. They are the insane and incredibly dangerous inmates of Darkwood Penitentiary. The astute amongst you may remember the name as the prison which good old Jimmy was placed in prior to the game's events. You may also be wondering how they're suddenly free and roaming the prison, or how any of these events come to pass without anybody noticing. Well, that's the thing. Somebody did notice. This is the journalist. That is her name because she's not given a name. They tease her name as Rob something. Roberta, maybe. I don't know, but they don't actually share it in any capacity. I'll call her Robert because it's funny. Her goal is to expose Starkweather's snuff ring and his associates by covering the story of James Earl Cash, and even putting herself in danger to rescue him from a pack of war dogs to ensure that his story is told. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. Robert was present at Cash's execution, but somehow discovered that it was staged. Smelling a bigger story than whatever crime saw Cash put on death row, she discovers that Starkweather not only has the Carcer City Police Department completely under his thumb, but he also has his own private militia, and no, it's not the War Dogs. The final two gangs aren't really gangs at all. They're the Carcer City Police Department and a paramilitary force known as Cerberus. The police department, specifically Police Chief Gary Schaefer, whom some of you may recognize the name of, were tasked with ensuring that Starkweather's dirty laundry didn't see the light of day. The Cerberus unit's duties were to carry out any other of Starkweather's interests on top of protecting him from any threats. The latter of these two forces are the men in black military uniforms who transport Cash between scenes. To hit home how much this game wasn't meant to be taken seriously, Cerberus literally wear bootleg Nazi armbands. In the minds of the Cerberus unit, the only thing they have to do is take Cash from one hunting ground to the next, which is often what signals the change of gangs the player will be facing. I like to divide Manhunt into two distinct halves, during the film shoot and post-film shoot. The film is meant to only contain Cash hunting the 5 gangs mentioned earlier, all while doing random shit that Starkweather wants him to do in the meantime, such as protecting a random homeless man or rescuing his family. Starkweather kidnaps Cash's family as well as tasking him with the objective of rescuing him from the hunters. Of course, they would only then be witnesses after the fact, and that can't happen, so they're killed anyway. Cash's final act of the film would be to die at the hands of the White Rabbit in Darkwood Penitentiary, but of course the game would be kind of shit if that were the end. So Cash survives, and instead hunts down the White Rabbit. This is what I would call the first mission of the post-film shoot. We know it's not in the script because Cerberus has gotten involved with protecting the White Rabbit. This is also one of the harder missions in the game, in my opinion, due to Cerberus having much longer range weapons than what Cash has available at that time, and the sheer number of them in open combat, which is a pretty good segue for the primary gameplay loop. Rockstar has, or had, this obsession with putting stealth sequences in non-stealth games. It's a pretty infamous set piece that they liked to deploy at random times. Manhunt is the opposite. It is primarily a stealth game that will, at times, force combat upon the player at random. Combat that, frankly, Manhunt was not designed for. The primary gameplay loop of Manhunt is to hide in the shadows and strike unseen with increasingly brutal executions. Sneak up behind an enemy, hold the execution button. The longer the button is held, the more brutal the execution. Sometimes an enemy has another man really close, and performing an execution can be difficult. That's where the fun for me lies. It's meant to be a game of patience, waiting for the perfect opportunity to step out from the shadows, do what you gotta do, and then slip away before anybody really notices you were there. Or to make it a little more interesting, let them see you execute a man and then run away, tee-heeing off into the distance, only for you to pounce and do it all over again. The game enforces and reinforces the idea that the shadows are your best friend, which makes it all the more infuriating when you're forced into gunfights, which are thankfully few and far between. I do think the gun mechanics were vastly improved in Manhunt 2, but I don't have Manhunt 2 anymore, at least not a version I could show on YouTube, maybe? I don't know. I'll have to look into it. After Cash kills the White Rabbit, we are fully off script, and Starkweather is no longer speaking to us. I personally think that this was such a wasted opportunity. I suppose Starkweather simply doesn't consider Cash to be alive at this point anymore, no matter what. But I would have loved at some point for Starkweather to begin speaking to Cash again, trying to intimidate him through his earpiece as Cash gets closer and closer to his mansion. The difficulty of the second half of the game is also very apparent. Since Cash is off-script, both Cerberus and the CCPD are scrambling to find him and kill him by utilizing their general knowledge of Cash's tactics. They use overwhelming forces, carrying almost exclusively guns, and utilize flashlights to illuminate the darkest of corners. It is also around this time where Cash meets Robert, the journalist. She explains everything that she's learned to him, and says that all of the evidence that she's collected is at her apartment in town. The goal is to get her there safely so she can expose Starkweather to Cash as a plan B, since his plans are to make Starkweather pay for what he's done. Instead of explaining everything beat by beat, I think I'd like to talk about a few aspects of the game that I think people remember fairly fondly, starting with Starkweather's mansion. Throughout the game, we're shown intermittent flashes of a disgusting man making pig sounds. There's not much to make of it at first, that is until we reach the mansion. This is Pigsy, one of Starkweather's former stars. Pigsy is an incredibly large, nude man who wears a pig head over his own face like a mask, and wields a chainsaw. I say former because he went insane at some point and became too difficult to control. Instead of killing him, Starkweather locked him up in some attic and uses him to dispose of corpses, because of course he's also a cannibal. Cash's adventure through the manor has been a fairly high-octane endeavor, as Pigsy has also escaped from his attic and has run amok. This acts as a distraction to divide the attention of Cerberus, which is likely the biggest reason why Cash even made it as far as he did. But it was only a matter of time before our paths would cross with Pigsy. Pigsy's boss fight is designed to place the fear of God into you. All of Cash's weapons gone. The environment rotten and gross. Pigsy, silent until he is upon you. It's like being one of the random hunters who had to deal with Cash's ambush tactics for the whole game, except you're the one on the receiving end this time. Pigsy doesn't hide per se, but as I said, he is mostly silent until he sees you, and then he revs up his chainsaw and begins screaming and squealing and chasing you with an incredible amount of speed. The way to defeat him is by doing what we've been doing for most of the game. Find a glass shard, hide, wait, strike, and run away. Of course, it's always easier said than done. Simply put, Manhunt exemplifies a concept that I personally find to be very compelling. A hero, or in this case an anti-hero, being forced to participate in a game for the sake of their own survival, placed fully at the whims of an unstable and despicable degenerate who could scarcely be referred to as a human being. I find Starkweather to be a very interesting concept for a villain, and as for Cash, he's a hard man to hate, if only because we spend several hours playing as the man, but I cannot say he's a good person who I'd enjoy the company of. Good people typically don't end up on death row, and while I understand that, I don't think there's a better personality type for this scenario in which he had found himself. I think it takes a true psychopath not only to escape the manhunt, but to participate in it with no reaction, no emotion. He was very quick to pick up and accept the situation he found himself in, and possibly relish in each kill, but his lack of any form of reaction makes it difficult to know for sure. we can, at the very least, say that he's not heartless, as he does show anger towards Starkweather for killing his family. But then again, who's to say that he's not just mad at Starkweather for making him save people pointlessly? If I had to pick one segment of Manhunt that I personally don't like very much, it would be the mission Divided They Fall, where Cash has freed himself from the whims of Starkweather's insane film and is trying to escape, but has to deal with Starkweather's lead, Hunter Ramirez. Ramirez ambushes Cash, steals his gun, and instead of just killing him outright, Ramirez lets Cash run and sixes war dogs on him. The goal of the mission is to climb to the top of this apartment building to flush out Ramirez, and then chase him all the way down to the bottom while having a shootout with many war dogs along the way. It's a different form of gameplay that goes against everything the current gameplay loop has been teaching. Abandon stealth, because more often than not, the hunters just know where you are. Climb up several flights of stairs only to have to race all the way back down since Ramirez is trying to call for backup, which will appear in the form of two men armed with sniper rifles. On one hand, I understand that it's a boss encounter. It's not meant to be easy, however, I don't think it should be the antithesis of the game's core gameplay loop. There are segments prior that try to get the player used to how guns work, and they really are better than using melee weapons, especially when paired with stealth. Full shootout segments where stealth is utilized very minimally or non-existently is incredibly stiff. Pop out of cover, shoot, back into cover, back and forth until every enemy is dead. It's as I said earlier, Manhunt 2 does implement more stealth gun mechanics that were lacking in the first game, and when I say stealth gun mechanics, I don't necessarily mean suppressors, but simply a quicker and more reliable ambushing tactic. Are they loud? Yes, but I don't have a problem with being seen and finding somewhere else to hide. That's part of the fun to me. Every enemy with a firearm is incredibly dangerous. Hell, every enemy is incredibly dangerous, period. Being spotted with nowhere to hide or nowhere to run is a very dangerous situation to be in. And in the mission Divided They Fall, outside of the very start of the mission, hiding is not an option. You have to bust in, climb up, climb back down, all while enemies are constantly aware of your presence. Now that being said, I don't think it's a bad mission, I just don't like it. Everything from Divided They Fall and beyond marks a shift in tone that I really appreciate. While I may not like the mission for its gameplay component, thematically it's great. Prior to the mission, we're under the instruction of Starkweather. What he wanted was blood. Slow, but not too slow, and methodical murder. He basically wanted a serial killer. And while we still have the skills from the first half of the game moving on to the second half, we now have to refine the minor secondary gameplay loop that was present in Starkweather's chapter. Guns become a lot more prominent to the point where every single enemy will now have one. To me, Cash being let loose into the city proper without guidance places his goals at the forefront of our attention. Before, it was all Starkweather. We do what he wants to stay alive, and eventually even becoming used to the constant weapons confiscations between zones and becoming more compliant with the Cerberus unit. Afterwards, Cash listens to nobody but himself. In his mind, he is free. The cameras are no longer on him, and Starkweather is no longer babbling in his ear, nor is he able to control Cash. And the free access to all of these firearms is the symbol of that new freedom. To me, no mission exemplifies that feeling quite like Wrong Side of the Tracks and Train to Kill. I lump them together despite being two missions because the atmosphere of both of them are fairly similar. Cash has expressed his plan to kill Starkweather to Robert, and makes for the subway station, which leads to the nearby train yard. Up to this point, the main hunter group has been the CCPD, sent out at the behest of Starkweather since he's paying off Chief Gary Schaefer. This whole sequence does an excellent job of displaying how the police force feels trying to capture Cash. At first, they don't take it too seriously. After all, it's just one guy. But as these missions progress, the hunters stop being beat cops and turn into the SWAT force, who bring out a more devastating weaponry, greater numbers, and make it more difficult to hide. Shotguns with flashlights, Desert Eagles, sniper rifles, submachine guns, the whole shebang. when all the other weapons that we've seen prior have just been double-barrel shotguns and revolvers. I feel that Train to Kill specifically has an excellent atmosphere that captures Cash's desperation to escape the city and find Starkweather, despite not one word being said. It's a downpour. There's only one path down the tracks. There are police everywhere, and they are armed to the teeth. The units presented in these areas also show how desperate Schaefer is to capture Cash. Not only does the unit danger increase to the SWAT level, but there are also more beat cops present, which tells the player that Cash is causing an all-hands-on-deck situation. Behind the scenes, Schaefer is telling his men, if you can walk, go there, do your damn job. Failure is not an option. All without needing to express a single word of exposition to the player. I would personally put Manhunt within my top 10 list of favorite games of all time, with a desire to replay it at least once a year. Anyway, I think I've rambled enough. My name is Box. Please like, subscribe, and have a wonderful day.